The private prosecution that former President Jacob Zuma is pursuing against his successor, President Cyril Ramaphosa, kicked off in the South Gauteng High Court today. Zuma accuses Ramaphosa of being an accessory to a crime allegedly committed by State Prosecutor Billy Downer and journalist Karyn Maughn. Zuma alleges that the pair leaked his medical records and that the president failed to act on it. Let's talk to SABC News reporter Canny Maphanga about these developments. Canny, good evening. Nice to have you in studio. I'm sure you're happy to be in studio for a change.
Good evening to you, Maughn, and the viewers.
Thank you. And so let's get straight to what the President's counsel, Advocate Mayenje, said. He wasted no time in labelling this an abuse of court processes and really a platform for the settling of political scores. And that part certainly seems to be an overriding and central theme in these proceedings, doesn't it?
Correct, Iman. Well, he's arguing that the president will be hauled before the criminal court on a process which is constitutionally flawed. Of course, when you look at these different private prosecutions, many people will ask, well, we've seen private prosecutions done in the country where there are high-profile matters being taken into consideration. We've seen AfriForum haul EFF leader Julius Malema, Mbuyiseni Ndlozi to court. They went before that criminal court, defended themselves, were acquitted. We also saw Duduzane Zuma, the former president's son, also get hauled before that private prosecution process. But I think matters need to be seen in context as well, Iman. And the issue at hand here is the process that led up to getting these summons issued and the nollie prosecution certificate, whether it even applied to the president as a whole. So that was a lot of the banter that we saw going back and forth in the court this morning as they argued over the legitimacy or the validity of the process leading up to that private prosecution bid being launched by the former president.
So architecturally, what are we looking forward to in the way that the proceedings are going to unfold? When we see not only, questions around constitutionality or, whether there's been some thresholds that have been breached or not, and this kind of mudslinging that's been happening on the sidelines of these proceedings.
Well, I think the main contention for the opposition, which is former President Jacob Zuma, who is opposing this application, is that now we have a situation where we have parallel hearings into the very same issue. So we now have the civil courts and the criminal courts, which the full bench themselves acknowledge that there's quite a clear distinction between the two, and they serve different purposes and have different characteristics when you speak of their procedures. And if an ordinary person like you or myself were hauled before the criminal court, the logical thing would be to, according to the argument of the former president, is to defend it in the criminal court according to that statute. However, the president's lawyers are arguing that it doesn't preclude him from actually going to the civil courts if he feels that his constitutional rights are being infringed on. So it was quite interesting to hear those arguments on jurisdiction, the constitutional validity of this entire process, and whether the full bench themselves, if they were to grant that relief, would it be usurping the DPP of her powers when she issued that nollie prosecution certificates, which there were two, the one that was quite clear on what should happen next, as well as the second one, which almost broadened the scope and said anybody. And that's where the issue of abusive process comes as well, because they've highlighted that, yes, these names were in the docket of the former president or his supplementary affidavit, if I could phrase it that way. But the context upon which he mentioned those names became a contentious issue in court, because he was highlighting this investigation that you spoke of earlier, where he wrote to the president about this alleged breach. So now you have all these names in this supplementary affidavit that is sitting in the docket, and they've used that as a means to say that, well, we can privately prosecute as an alleged accessory after the fact.
So there seems to be a lot of technical and legal hygiene that needs to be settled before even, the actual matter itself, takes center stage. It's around, where does authority lie? Whose responsibility was it? As we move forward with this, and we'll get to what this means for us as a country, and we don't even have the space to talk about that yet. But let's talk about what happens next in the South Gauteng High Court before we get to optically how this looks for the president's office.
Well, this is a two-day hearing hearings. So we've heard from the president's lawyers, we've heard from Advocate Darlene Bofu. We understand that he'll be finishing his argument tomorrow morning. There's a friend of the court as well that is trying to intervene, and there'll be replies, and we can expect that the judgment will be reserved. Of course, there's that other parallel hearing in the criminal court pending the outcome of this civil court hearing that will continue. I think that is the 27th or the 26th of May, around there, if I stand to be corrected on that one, Iman. But that matter is still enrolled in the criminal court, and the basis of the former president's arguments is that there's time being wasted by having these two parallel hearings taking place at the same time, and that the statute says that you can go and defend yourself in the criminal court, and when it gets to your plea, that's when you will deal with this issue of whether the right to prosecute or whatever the constitutionally full process was. That is when you ventilate those issues. So there's a lot of debates about whether they've even gone to the correct court to challenge this matter. But as we stand now, there are two parallel hearings pending the outcome of Part B of this application. Then we can then take you to the criminal court to see how that takes place. But of course, it is quite difficult to secure a final incident, Iman. It might be possible that in a review application that the court might actually refer the matter back to the National Prosecuting Authority, for example, to say, consider this matter over again. And instead of giving a final order, that would effectively mean that the president would not be able to pursue this private prosecution now or ever in the future if he was successful in the relief that he is seeking.
Let's talk about the optics, and beyond just the court. When we looked at the ANC's NEC gathering and or their national conference, for example, where you see kind of conviviality between Zuma and Ramaphosa, these proceedings really lay bare some of the deeper issues and the schisms between them, but also in terms of just again impaling the presidency's attention on matters like these at a time when the country is going through such great crisis, managing all of these multiple crises simultaneously. It's really not a good look.
And that's part of the president's argument, is that it interferes with his work as the president of the country, not necessarily just the ANC as a whole. Of course, there's that underlying argument about the motives and the ulterior purpose of launching such a private prosecution bid. You remember the resolutions of the conference. If the president were to appear before the criminal court, a criminal dock, or to be charged, then that step-aside resolution does apply to him as well. Remember, they reaffirmed it, saying that it must be applied without fear or favor or prejudice. So there's a lot of play regarding the politics as well of this matter. Of course, the former president is denying that there's any political play in this matter, saying that this started in August of 2022, way before Nasrik even sat, and it's clearly only just about the issue of resolving this alleged breach in the MPA, which he believes compromised the criminal justice system as a whole.
Well, we'll continue to follow this through your eyes. Thank you, Canny, for that comprehensive wrap of the day. The day 2 of the hearing proceeds tomorrow in the South Gauteng High Court, and we'll bring you all those details on Full View as well.